And what led to the decision to sell Mareeba was probably, and I think it is probably number one, and then some daylight, was risk and exposure to us as equity owner-operators. Lack of return on investment in regard to how hard we were working to keep the show on the road, and unlike what the media likes to put out there, we weren't driving around in our Lamborghinis and Maseratis and living the high life. And again, because of just and again, it's not a state secret.
Most people in aged care only hear about a sale once the deal is done. A short announcement, a new logo, a few polite words about transition and continuity. What they don't hear is what it actually felt like behind the scenes, the pressure, the responsibility, the contracts, the doubt. And for smaller providers in the sector, that conversation matters because right now there are operators carrying enormous weight, trying to do the right thing by residents, staff and families while dealing with rising costs, compliance pressure, workforce challenges, and a system that at times feels like it's squeezing smaller players from every direction. My guest today is Sam Baker. Sam was one of the owners of Mareeba Aged Care McLean before the business was sold to the Wooden Group late last year. And what makes this conversation important is that Sam has been willing to speak about openly what the journey was really like, not just the decision to sell, but what led to it and what surprised him and what other providers should understand before they find themselves in a similar position. Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Great to see you again, Mark.
Thanks for your time, Sam. I know we've spoken a lot over the years, and it's good to have you on the podcast. And I think, for those of us, for our viewers, if you can please give us your backstory and a sense of Mareeba and your role in the business.
Most definitely, Mark, and I appreciate you're going to need to edit it down because I can talk. My involvement with Mareeba, believe it or not, started back in 1982 when I went to the opening of the freshly built greenfield site that my father, Bruce, was the managing director of. It was a private equity owned business with a myriad of basically mums and dads investors. This is obviously well and truly before superannuation came in, so people looking to just make spare resources work. I was at the opening, as I say, as a callow youth, had very little exposure to my father's aged care dealings while I was off getting educated. Then that all changed dramatically in 2007 when I moved back up here to Glen Ennis, which is approximately 2.5 hours drive away from McLean and the far north coast. My father dropped dead out of the blue at 74 years of age, and so I filled his director, co-managing director slot with my fantastic business partner, Steve Gordon. And then from 2007 until we settled with Whitten, 1st of October 2025, I was a director of the business, not a clinician, but filling every role, sitting above clinician, really, Mark. So between my fellow director, Steve Gordon, and myself, we were general managers, facility managers, HR, IR, all things which we'll no doubt cover off on further in the chat, but basically where the buck stopped on all fronts.
No, thanks, Sam. And it's good you definitely had a lot of caps that both you and Steve were wearing, especially as, own operators, standalone, and, carrying on your father's legacy. I wanted to ask you, when did you first feel that things were shifting, when it wasn't just hard, but something had to fundamentally change?
And I'm sure the people who listen in or watching to this will nod their heads vigorously. Where it was particularly noteworthy, Mark, and most of these things are only really sort of established with the beauty of hindsight, but in our lived experience, it was pre and post-COVID. So up until COVID, The bedrock of any good aged care campus is great staff. So our ability to attract and retain the terrific staff that make Mareeba became a major challenge. Obviously, during that late 1920 and into 21, a lot of the general public were very, very apprehensive about putting their most valuable asset or relationship, being an elderly relative, in an aged care facility due to the mass media's perception that they were plague riddled, enterprises. But so operationally, definitely COVID, Mark, and then commercially, probably years before that. With a bit of hindsight, I think 2014 or around then was probably the commercial crest of, when I say RAC, residential aged care, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with that term. While we settled in 2025, greedy guts here does look back and goes, geez, it would have been nice to be doing the transaction in 2014. And based on the questions you've sent through, we're going to cover off on why the decision was delayed. But so COVID in particular took many years for the sector to really work through.
Yeah, you're right, Sam, that COVID really did rock the sector in a way which no one could have ever prepared for, and no head office teams or working groups could prepare for. In terms of Mareeba, was there a moment that it went from manageable pressure to this might not be sustainable?
Well, good question, Mark. Is, again, subject to who is listening in or your listenership, viewership. If they're, I don't know, you're more than one, I could ask you the question, Mark, sort of, which probably will be the case during our nice catch-up. I'm not quite sure what the critical mass is in regards to size, where sort of back of house and stress can be delegated within your organisation. But as a standalone operator with that management structure that I outlined, Steve and I were very much, the boiling frog principle, Mark, in that the water temperature, even when I got involved in 2007, was probably definitely not room temperature. Like the gas mark was lit under the pot, so to speak, even back then. But over time, we all know that analogy of, over time the water gets hotter and hotter and hotter until it's boiling. We probably did not have one particular crossroads moment or incident, Mark, but I must admit I was speaking to another, bit like you, another gent who's got depth of knowledge, fellow by the name of Paul Bradley, and this was years ago, and he just sort of drolly observed, I bet you're investing a lot more emotional capital in the business, and he hit that nail right on the head. So, sorry to answer your question, Mark, I think it happened incrementally, Mark, and again, without hijacking, I should say, your prompts to me, the new act in our case was a major triggering date because, again, all your interested parties listening on this would hopefully agree with me that we've never got a new iteration of act or compliance to make our lives easier or more lucrative. And interrelated to that, I was speaking to a property valuer beginning of last year, and asked him about, what's your take on the landscape for standalones? And he drolly and quite probably jaundicely, but I would suggest correctly, said, they don't want you in the space. Look at the new act. Being the compliance and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, we didn't have a straw that broke the camel's back moment, Mark. It was just probably more that boiling frog syndrome. But we did have a moment of clarity to go, actually, this water's getting very hot.
No, and I appreciate the honesty, Sam. I know that some of these questions are pretty raw, and when you set a business, for want of a better term, it feels like a baby. Especially the fact that it was a legacy business; it was your father's. You were thrust into this position of responsibility, and so I appreciate that some of these questions are quite raw. And you've already answered, I guess, the next question in terms of what led to that decision to sell. How much of
Yeah.
it was strategic, and
Well,
how much of
well,
it was practical building.
well, Mark, I did do some homework for that. Yeah, rather than just winging it, which I possibly can, but it'd be more waffly. Is that I actually, and I don't, what I'm just about to say isn't in any order, but when what led to the decision to sell Mareeba was probably, and I think it is probably number one, and then some daylight, was risk and exposure to us as equity owner operators. Lack of return on investment in regard to how hard we were working to keep the show on the road, and unlike what the media likes to put out there, we weren't driving around in our Lamborghinis and Maseratis and living the high life. And again, because of just and again, it's not a state secret. Steve Gordon, my business partner, is 16 years older than myself. So, and unlike my family, where by osmosis or just happenstance, I took over from my father. Steve's 3 adult children had no appetite to work in aged care. And it's interesting, it's not necessarily aged care, but there's a lot of family-owned businesses that go that way, where the well-educated next generation see how hard their parents work in a business, and they go, well, I don't want to work as hard as you, mum and dad, or I don't want to be in a 365-day-a-week business, et cetera, et cetera. But in particular, just looping back to the risk, Mark, and again, people listening in would understand all this as it was described during the Royal Commission, that the RAD scheme is basically a $50 billion Ponzi scheme. And in our case, it was soft debt. And it's a sexy number. It wasn't a number that came to Steve and I during the sale, but we had in excess of $20 million worth of RAD exposure to our residents, which for a regionally based 118-bed campus was probably about par, relatively modern with our campus. The policymakers and politicians and the public, Mark, fail to realise that is ultimately a liability back to the owner-operators. So that wargaming of, if this really goes sideways for Steve and I, what does that look like? Well, the liabilities of Mareeba Aged Care could have been a contagion for our whole asset base.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sam. I agree. I think from the outside, people assume a sale is a win. Did it actually feel like one to you?
I'm hard to please, Mark. Just ask my long-suffering wife. Yes and no. Like our overarching, get it further to let's get the gorilla off our back with this, not only RAD debt, but bank debt, leave liability, and in particular, my great business partner, highly motivated as I was as well. Just looping back to that, it wasn't a situation of me going off and finding another business partner. I didn't have the appetite to do that. And again, the risk of getting in bed with someone who wasn't as fantastic as Steve. It was a win, Mark, and I need to absorb what comes out of my mouth, because settling in October last year, number one objective was to get out. We achieved that goal. Number two objective was to make sure that we didn't, as I say, have that contagion into our asset base. That was achieved. Number three objective, make sure we're out before the new Act. That was achieved. So that's all in the win column. In the loss column, Mark, was it representative? Was our bottom line figure psychologically aligned with how much hard work we'd put into the business? No. But in the scheme of things, we're out. And interestingly enough, we had a component of the sales proceeds left in escrow for the ins and outs and the tidy up, and the due date is actually today, 31st of March, and there's a little bit of backwards and forwards there, some of it being a bit unedifying, but Steve and I lightheartedly say we've got to keep telling each other we're out. So short answer is it was a win, but like other proprietors in the same space, it's probably not representative of the hard work put in, the great organisation that we ran, of which we had huge justified pride in.
No, correct. And I agree, Sam. What shocked you the most once lawyers and contract advisors got involved? What was the biggest eye-opener?
And I'm a wannabe comedian, Mark, as you well know, is that, for better or worse, Mark, I don't take too seriously. Being an aged care proprietor tends to highlight none of us get out of this alive. So keeping a bit more of a light-hearted mindset doesn't mean you don't take things seriously. But the answer is, while once I had death by consultants, Mark, and I had some great consultants, as they want to be, because they charge prohibitive amounts of money. But when we were in the belly of the beast of our transaction, after we'd had offer and acceptance, and we were at least first getting to the promised land of an exchange contract and then settling on the same, and I've only done it once. I've done a lot of other commerce, but I've only sold one and one only rack, Mark. I'd ask sort of drolly, is there a more complicated, multifaceted, going concern business to exit? And the lawyers, consultants, accountants would say, not that we can think of off the top of our head. If someone asked me to describe it in a word, I would say dense, which highlights the need to have, you need good jungle guides. Like if someone's listening to this and they're all over their front-end ops, and I know you've got a good deep ops background, it's not the type of transaction that your good local solicitor that you've got the rapport with and your good local accountant that you've got the rapport with can help you with. You need the experts, and the experts do not miss you. But they're it's sort of a chicken and egg, Mark. You can't get to the promised land of being out without them. And, that's right. And therefore, with that density comes experts, comes cost.
Yeah, I understand. What did you realise very quickly about how these deals are actually done?
Yeah, that's a good question. The difference between offer and acceptance and the backslapping at the front end of the deal versus getting an agreed exchangeable contract, Mark, is light and day. And I'll give myself up that I'm sort of not renowned for being obsessive about detail, but the devil is in the detail. And again, getting back to that multifaceted, again off the top of my head, drilling down and getting forensic with leave balances, drilling down and getting forensic with RAD balances, interest paid, drilling down to the status of the 101 contracts we have with service providers, and again, buried in there, your ability to assign those, break those, and so on and so forth. It's just multi-layered and it's time-consuming and dense, Mark.
Yeah, and I've spoken to a lot of colleagues, CEOs who are standalone or from smaller providers, and it's a very uneasy feeling if you're not a bigger player, if you're not a sort of a big fish in the pond. And like you've mentioned now, often you do need to seek advice that's not within your backyard. And you need to vet that advice, because I mean there are plenty of service providers in all those disciplines,
Mark. But, and again, it's probably being real, unlike a residential house transaction, Mark, where you can do that without even meeting your solicitor. You know, it can all be done online. Is that you want to make sure not only they've got the expertise, but you can see a good collegiate relationship, because it's very hot and heavy and intense. You're going to have a short, expensive, intense relationship with that team. So you need to have the right team.
Were there parts of the process that you felt were more one-sided than you expected?
Oh, we got creamed, but because it's a buyer's market at the moment, as we all know here I'm speaking to you from Glen Ennis, Mark, which jumping back to, was it a win? Well, the longer it goes, and me getting over myself, Mark, and getting over my greedy nature, it'll present as a bigger win. And I think I might have mentioned this on the phone when we were lining this session up. McLean Care, which is a service provider just to the west at Inverell, have been out overtly in the mainstream media in that we're conceding the field and getting out.
Yes.
They're not saying we're selling it to Whitten, RSL, Baptist, some big provider. They've just basically shot a distress flare up in the sky. Obviously, I assume based on bottom line and other such things that we might touch on. So because it is hideously a buyer's market, that's represented in the commerce mark. And yes, Steve Gordon has a droll one, the golden rule. They've got the gold, they make the rules. And so our ability to push back was somewhat limited, and without being too sort of controversial, or it's again commentary, active buyers at the moment in a buyer's market know they've got the whip hand mark, know they've got the leverage, and they act accordingly. And that's commerce. If I was in their shoes, I'd do the same thing.
Correct. And look, there's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions over the last 18 months. Do you think smaller providers are being squeezed out of the sector?
Getting back to my comment about the new Act and that value, yes, is the short answer. And if they're not, again, it depends on what their charter is and their mission statement is, Mark, and in particular, the financial ballast that they've got at their disposal. But if they're not wargaming, if not an exit, is it how do we, if we want to, our mission statement is to remain in high care, residential aged care, open-ended, how are we going to fund it and possibly most likely have to cross-subsidise it, because it's, you're probably as familiar, if not more familiar, with the endless stuff that comes out of Stuart Brown. I haven't seen any lately, but and you can tease apart regional, outer regional, etc. But the macro for RACs being 6 out of 10 are running an operational loss. If we ran our household expenses like that, sooner or later, you've got to pay the piper, Mark, don't you?
Correct. And we often hear when it comes to a RAC being sold, the costs. But this question, not financially, what did this transaction cost you personally, as a person going through?
It's probably not a bad thing, because you can see my ego from the moon, Mark. But it took a fair dent in all this. Big 19 years of my life with laser-like focus to keep it all on the straight and narrow. Being a standalone RAC owner-operator is like being I'd suggest even a dairy farmer has got a better gig, because at some stage they might get organised and someone else is going to milk the cows. Looping back to that risk topic, is that your risk is there every day of the week. With our staff were great, our residents were great, our extended Mareeba family were great, but it only takes a few squirrely interactions to detonate the goodwill you've achieved over many decades. The days of the standalone, unless, again, speak from a country point of view, the local council is budgeting and the ratepayer is happy to go, rightio, to have that nice facility in our small centre. Council has got to wear X dollars a year because it does not pay for itself.
Correct. And, you just mentioned there that not only are you owner-operators, are, directors with shareholders' rights and responsibilities and under ASIC, but you're part of the community. You speak to families, you're there, you're the face, and you often become embedded in the community. Was there any guilt in selling?
There were, and we've, it's probably may well have been taken down by Widden by now, but we were very proud, and with some of the best money that we spent in that business, Mark. We had an honour board in our lobby of about 15 plus community groups that we supported, ranging from the Stedford to the Yamba Surf Lifesaving Club. And that was, as I say, when it's the right decision, it's the easy decision, Mark. So that was money well spent. Probably the guilt, which we obviously had to get over, was we had built a very collegiate team environment with our great staff. And because, like a lot of country areas, people like living where they're living, there's not a huge amount of job opportunities. Like the local sugar mill probably pipped us as the biggest employer during sugarcane season, but averaged out, we'd be in the top 3 employers in the town, employing in some cases not that unusual to definitely have 2 generations working for us, in some cases 3. So we must have been doing something right as an employer. The guilt was probably more to do with our great staff being absorbed by a larger organisation, and that's not any to run down larger organisations. Obviously, you just become a number in the organisation. If you've got our roster fully populated was sort of 140 odd people. If you've got a workforce of 10,000, it's a different culture, Mark, isn't it?
It is, and you've said it there, and it needs to be said. Both you and Steve were trading as a business for a considerable amount of time. We'd use the words long period of time. You weren't around for a good time, a short time. There are often, there are providers here in Sydney, some boutique providers that have sold to the bigger providers because they couldn't handle the stress or the pressures. Yeah. But to stand the test of time that you have, there's a lot of achievements there in a way to, I guess, still eminently proud of what we did,
from, the 44 years that my family was associated with it. Mark, and even though Steve and I at pains to point out we're not clinicians, we were there generally every fortnight, sometimes even more than that, subject to what was happening, walking around, open door policy, completely approachable to everyone within the 4 walls, ranging from family members, residents, staff, contractors, and that was part of our X factor, in particular for our senior management, that they weren't relying on an area manager to turn up every blue moon and sort of rattle through the fundamentals and I'll see you in another quarter or whatever, however it's done at the bigger end of town. But that does loop back to, well, that's a commitment you've got to make, and it is that relentlessness of it, which is only solved by, which we did back in 2014. We dabbled with, and fortunately, as it transpired, toyed with getting big so we could, bigger I should say, because at that more buoyant time of the space, it was all about you need to get critical mass, you need to fractionalise your cost, just have one back of house for, more facilities. But we, part of that, X factor would have been hard to duplicate into another facility. But the guilt or the reluctance, and that made it particularly ticklish, when we had to announce that we were selling. It was a bit of a circus, Mark, but as one of our expert team observed, once the staff are starting to ask you about the new uniforms and what they've got to wear, well, they've moved on.
That's right. And I guess, when the deal was done, what did you actually feel yourself and Steve? Was it relief, grief, pride, or a mix of all of it?
Again, just for hopefully out of this people and out of your little black book, Mark, anyone who wants to speak to me direct to get more into the nitty gritty of it all, because of the announcing having the staff meeting and announcing the sale was done not lightly and with a degree of trepidation, but because again of the denseness of it, and again you're a commercial animal, the feelings don't really trigger until you've settled. Like the exchange and grinding out, which there's still plenty of work to be done between exchange and settlement, grinding all that out tended to absorb us so much that the feelings weren't really active until settlement. At settlement, it was relief. Further to my earlier commentary, because of the pros and cons, it wasn't champagne on. It wasn't champagne. There was celebration, but it wasn't champagne on ice with Steve and I because of the commerce, Mark. Yep. We've settled. Obviously, we made an educated decision to proceed with that transaction. It's probably under that banner, Mark. Very happy with the decision. Not so cock a hoop about the result commercially.
Yeah, and I appreciate Sam, and I guess hindsight's a great thing. So we're looking back now retrospectively. So it's always good to be armchair analysts when you're not in the actual boiling pot, as they say. So these are observations, not criticism on the transaction or the sale. But looking back, what signs did you ignore for too long?
To make us slow to sell. And interesting you asked that, Mark, because I think it was part of your prompt sheet there, and I actually wrote it out to collect my thoughts, which was in particular, I don't think those are necessarily in any order. Probably our big oversight with the beauty of hindsight, Mark, was Steve and I weren't, we're too busy operationally, but we did not take the time to take a step back and say, rightio, not just the pure commerce of where we're getting coming into our bank accounts to provide that director role that I was talking about before. We didn't frame it against the market value of the asset to sort of look at, getting back to the risk sort of discussion, Mark, to go, or risk and, return on investment, to go, do you realise we're putting blood, sweat and tears in to get that paltry amount of money out of it at the end of, each year? From, again, my own take, not necessarily Steve's, I think we were probably, again, guilty of letting transaction costs and taxes cloud our decision rather than just wearing the fact that capital gains, by way of example, is just something that is out there and you have to wear it. So that clouded decisions and interrelated to the succession planning sort of angle, which did sort of crystallise itself over time back in the rose-coloured sort of land mark of, say, 2013 or 2014, which is 12 years ago. There was probably a bit of, well, what else are we going to do with ourselves if we're not doing this? I'm sure we would have found something else. And my last thing that I wrote down for myself is that, again, hindsight, as you rightly say, is you're probably better off selling early and lamenting and going from that way. And again, we were not overly prevalent, but I think a lot of people listening in here, if they're proud of their campus and have been doing it for a while, they've probably got a wish list, either an active wish list happening of CapEx and things, or stuff that they're sort of thinking, oh, well, when we do this, we'll be ready to sell. There's always a when we do this on the horizon, and it'll never be, absolutely perfect, but you'll have it close to it. So
I agree, Sam. I think you can take heart from the fact that, you were able to, with Steve, obviously scope out and work with the teams that supported you with this transaction to exit the market and to sell. And you didn't have to wave a white flag, which there are a lot of providers now, unfortunately, that are in that situation now where they're waving a white flag and, like you just mentioned there, commercially, people are just waiting for them to be a bit.
And it's not good luck to them, Mark, but as everyone's probably aware, Apollo Care, I spoke to their CEO as part of our whole process, and he lightheartedly said, "You're too good for us." And if you're, again, getting back to that ballast, a bit more positivity for the listenership or the viewership, I think the worm will turn, which, again, part of our decision making. Will aged care improve? Macro, I think it will, Mark, in regard to funding, sustainability. The big unknown is how long that takes. And I was probably done a favour by having that age gap with Steve, because if we were both the same vintage, we probably would have talked ourselves into, let's hang in here for another 5 years. It can only get better. Well, who's to say that is the case, Mark, is that it may well be worse still, because it's a long while since aged care's been on the media cycle or the political cycle, especially with what's happening now in the world.
Correct. And if someone is sitting there now quietly wondering whether they can keep going, what would you say to them?
Have a good arm's length look. Well, probably do a lifestyle audit first and foremost. I'm a big advocate for mental health and keeping your head straight. Mark, and you being a gun recruiter know what the churn is like in senior management in our field, because of the stresses and all those competing demands. Well, those same stresses go up the line to the approved providers and the owners. It would be, well, are you enjoying it? Is your workload sustainable? Is your work-life balance where you want it to be? Subject to those answers, to have a very clear-eyed review of what you're doing. Because, again, for today, we sat down with the agent we used in November 21, went to the marketing with our expressions of interest in April 22, which, with the beauty of hindsight, was probably the bottom of the market. Got absolutely stony silence during that campaign, made our own luck by getting a capital grant from the federal government, and which, again, is part of the ego side of the equation. Care of the capital grant deleted the last of our shared rooms, had the campus sale ready, looking very impressive for where it is and what it is. And we would have probably had offer and acceptance middle of last year and settled 1st of October. So 22, 23, 24, all but 4 years from go to woe, to do it in a timely manner, Mark. And again, within that answer to your question, you might be thinking actively sale or exit the space, but there would be value if it's better than a 60-40 likelihood, or probably better than 10% likely that you might seriously be thinking of doing what we've done. Well, you start pulling your team together, Mark, because that's a time-consuming process, getting back to having people that you want, like literally having the binder on the shelf, the sale binder to go, right, which everyone listening in would have their critical incident binder of their most likely top 5 dramas. You want to have the same for sale.
Sure. And do you think, in your opinion, do you think some providers are waiting too long to have those honest conversations about succession, sale, or survival?
100%. And to be fair to them all, Mark, more often than not, they're putting one foot in front of the other to deal with the latest compliance pain that's been foisted upon them, putting the 1001 spot fires out that day-to-day operations require. And I said it 5 minutes ago, you're probably better erring on the side of going, and I hate to say it, it's probably too late in that it is that buyer's market. But I do loop back to the risk side of it, and they might be differently structured to Steve and I, where they've war gamed. Yeah, well, Steve and I were a mile away from being in a financial position that if we had a big run on RADs, and rather than our line of credit that most people use for ins and outs, approximately $2 million line of credit to run a $20 million RAD pool, and all of a sudden you need to come up with an extra $5 million because of another pandemic or whatever. Well, and again, as we're probably all aware, it's like the policymakers wanting to eliminate RADs long term, getting back to we didn't want to be around when that happened, Mark, because we still had that soft debt.
And well said and truthfully said. Sam, for the smaller providers, the standalone providers that are listening to this episode, what do you hope they take from this episode and from what you've said? And there's been a lot of insights here. We appreciate them. We appreciate the fact that you've spoken truthfully with your heart on your sleeve. But for the smaller providers there that are actively thinking or potentially contemplating a few scenarios, what do you hope they take from this episode?
Oh, well, probably, and I'm a cow cocky now, Mark, up here in Glen Ennis, and aged care used to be a nice off-farm income, so a good case of Murphy's Law. No sooner have I got rid of my cash flow than we've got another stinking drought here at Glen Ennis. And I was speaking to a great mate of mine who's a highly, highly regarded ag consultant, and he was just trying to give me a bit of a pep talk. And he said, well, be dynamic. And I would suggest the same goes for being a RAC owner-operator, that you need to be dynamic. And also I would suggest don't delude yourselves that the federal overlords are going to come riding to your rescue as a standalone, because I don't know, you might have your own opinion on it, Mark, but, one jaundiced view about the rationalisation is getting back, and it's probably more now, but during the Royal Commission, the $50 billion pool of RADs was discussed. It's probably now 60 with the passing of time. That doesn't matter who's in power, Mark, that the department doesn't want to be exposed to that sum of money by a myriad of providers. From a policy setting, they'd probably prefer 10, roughly. That's not going to happen, but how many approved providers are there nationally? Do we know? Thought it was about 1,000.
Correct. There's a significant amount, but you're right that federally they would like there to be a much smaller pool of
Yeah.
providers.
So, sorry, be dynamic and probably be to the point. I'm renowned for directness and brutality with how I roll, Mark, but probably be pretty brutally self-aware. And from lived experience, our boiling frog syndrome was how much more time, effort, and emotional capital we had to put in, along with our great staff, to keep the show on the road.
Correct. So, for the smaller providers that are out there, standalone providers with a bit of real estate, is there any advice on how they could future-proof themselves in this current market and climate to sustain the next few years with the new act?
Well, and I feel sorry for people who may have to do this, Mark, because building rates were stupid and are stupid and are going to remain stupid, I'd suggest. But and again, we had to sort of mentor, counsel, and guide our clinical staff with the fact that RACs are now a hospitality function as much as a care function.
Correct.
The general public assume, like in the good old days, we as a sector could really justifiably, I might add, be very strong on look at our clinical care, look at the quality of our RNs, et cetera, et cetera. Joe and Joanna public take that as the same as the Wi-Fi being connected. That's just an assumption. So therefore, it's a hospitality space. That's your physical built environment that's got to be contemporary, well maintained. A couple of companion rooms you can live with, Mark, but if you think you're going to fill twin rooms in this day and age, you're deluding yourself. And with that, resident lifestyle stuff being very strong as well. We toyed when we had, probably speaking to you about senior appointments, Mark, we seriously looked into changing our approach and putting not a clinician who's come up through the ranks into the sort of facility manager role, but a general manager on a setting that you're basically running a boutique hotel. Clinical care will be a portfolio sitting next to residents' activities, sitting next to housekeeping, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that model's got merit, because if you're a general manager of the boutique hotel, you're strong on, people management, conflict resolution, customer expectations, and the like. So, looping back to the dynamic reference, you've got to remain dynamic. Is that if you're sitting there with an older campus that you might be well maintained, but if it's careworn and a bit tired, again, subject to how much competition you've got locally, Mark, you are going to struggle. And again, that was part of the ego. We walked out for the last time with a few companion rooms, care of the capital grant, these beautifully refurb rooms that look like a 3-4 star hotel, which assisted us in the sale. Greatly assisted us.
Well, good use of the investment.
100%. And to be fair, thank you, the taxpayer and the federal government. So, but the old rogue being my father, who got us into aged care, used to have a throwaway management line about cattle or grazing operations. Mark, always have your stock and your property ready to sell. The same goes for probably any real estate, even your home where you reside, is that if you decided that you wanted to exit and sell it, well, it's not a good look if you've got 2 years' worth of work before it's eye-catching to a seller.
Correct.
Because you either take it to the market in that state and take a bath, or trade off time and resource getting it sale ready.
Correct. Do you miss it? Do you miss being...
Oh, I miss the comrade. I miss the people, Mark. Whether it's our residents family members, and our staff drove us mad. Some of the staffing issues, but yeah, I do miss the human element of it, Mark. But I don't miss one of the first things Steve Gordon trained into me, Mark. Further to falling from the skies, his new business partner with no aged care pedigree, and nothing's changed from when he said this 19 years ago, Mark. He said, well, remember, Sam, our biggest strength is our biggest weakness. And I leant forward to get the pearl of wisdom from the veteran. And he says, well, our biggest strength is we're a franchisee of the federal government, which means our terms of commercial trade are rock solid. We are going to get paid. There's no issue there. But the flip side of that is we're beholden to the federal government and the policymakers. And as a little mini rant, the policymakers, if they've done operational day-to-day stuff in aged care, it's decades ago, and their operational, how current their operational.
Correct. A lot of No, and I think you definitely, from speaking to some of the staff that are still working there, treated them very well. They're very happy to be employed. You know, by Mareeba, you had a significant contribution to the community. You've mentioned about the honours board, the associations, the committees that you've supported, and the families and residents and staff's lives that you've positively impacted and changed. So I really appreciate your honesty, Sam, and thank you for being willing to speak openly about an experience that I believe will resonate with a lot of people across the sector. Correct. Very, very, very well said, Sam. And like I said, appreciate your insights and for jumping on our podcast, talking aged care. And I'm sure a lot of the things that you've spoken about regarding contracts management, your actual statement of financial position as a business, and the process and the emotions behind it will definitely resonate. So thanks for your time.